This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Aloha, and welcome to the monthly public presentation of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Since 1990, the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii has been following our mission of promoting human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education, as we've grown to become one of the largest all-volunteer nonprofit vegetarian societies in the nation. We are proud to say that we are celebrating our 25th birthday this year. We'd like to encourage those of you who are not yet members, and even those of you who are not yet vegetarians, to join the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii tonight. You'll receive an informative newsletter, as well as discounts on Oahu, Maui, Kauai, and the Big Island, and at many vegan and vegetarian-friendly restaurants, businesses, and groceries, such as at down-to-earth, organic, and natural stores. Please remember that if you spend just $10 a week in groceries or on eating out, at our 5% discount level on a one-year membership, you'll be saving lots of money. You'll also be supporting events such as tonight's, which are not only made possible, but free to the community as well through your membership dues and donations. Please note that you can view tonight's talk on our VSH program, Vegetarian, on public access channels across the state, as well as on our website, www.vsh.org, where you'll find many of our previous presentations and many other resources, including our famous dining guide. It is now time for our special guest. We're delighted to have with us tonight Will Tuttle, PhD. Dr. Will Tuttle, visionary author and inspirational speaker, has presented widely throughout North America, Europe, and the Pacific. Author of the acclaimed Amazon #1 bestseller, The World Peace Diet, which has been published in over a dozen languages. He is the recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Prize. The creator of several wellness and advocacy training programs, his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, focused on educating intuition and altruism in adults. And he has taught college courses in creativity, humanities, mythology, religion, and philosophy. A former Zen monk and a Dharma master in the Korean Zen tradition, as well as a 35-year vegan, he is devoted to cultural healing and awakening, and has created 8 CD albums of original piano music. His wife, Madeline, is a visionary artist from Switzerland, and these are her paintings to my left, if you can see those. They're pretty nice. Dr. Tuttle's presentation tonight is entitled Healing Our World, a deeper look at food. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Will Tuttle.
4 years ago, I went vegan for the health of it. And 3 years ago, I picked up a book called The World Peace Diet by Dr. Will Tuttle. And I devoured it and became a passionate, compassionate, ethical vegan from that day on, all because of Will. And if you would have told me that one day I'd be getting to lay Will, I would have gone vegan 30 years ago. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Terry. Let's give a big hand to Lorraine and all the volunteers of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii for this wonderful event. And thank you. Thank you all so much for keeping the vision alive, and not only keeping it alive, but actually, I think, encouraging so many people to look more deeply into the most important thing that we can look deeply into, which is our routine mistreatment of animals for food and for other products. I think the underlying message is enormously positive. The underlying message is that all of us have been raised in a society where we have been forced from the time we're little kids to participate in mealtime rituals that are not in our best interests. And that the greatest adventure we can go on in terms of living a life of meaning and purpose and authenticity, really of awakening ourselves spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, and just on the level of physical health, is to question the great taboo. The taboo, I refer to it in the World Peace Diet, against knowing who you're eating, right? That this basic taboo shuts us down on many levels, psychologically and intellectually, emotionally, when we're forced as little kids, as I said, from the time we're basically infants, to participate in mealtime rituals. Anthropologists understand that meals are the most powerful way that any society passes its values from generation to generation. Rituals in general are the most powerful way, and meals are the most powerful ritual in any society. So when we look deeply into the meals of the culture that we're born into, it is an enormously effective way of understanding ourselves and understanding why we have the problems that we're having as individuals and also as a society, and how we can solve those problems. So I'm delighted that you're all here. I know if you found your way here, it means that you're already beginning to question some of the official stories in our society, and there's no greater gift we can give to ourselves, to our loved ones, to future generations, to hungry people, to the ecosystems, than to question the official stories, the official protein story, the official calcium story, the official human superiority story, and all these other stories, these narratives that essentially are propelling us, I think, as individuals and also as a society in a direction that is, again, not in our best interest and is really devastating on every level. So what I'd like to do, I guess, in the short time that we have here is talk about the ramifications of our food choices. There's two basic levels of this, and in the World Peace Diet I go into both of them. The outer level is the effect of our food choices on the outer world, on our environment, on our culture, on our health. The inner level is how it affects the inner landscape of our consciousness. How does it actually affect us psychologically, emotionally, spiritually? When we look here, I think, when we look into the deeper dimensions of who we are as human beings, we begin to see that this is a huge, this whole thing is gigantic. And, you know, in my own case, I'll just say very briefly, I was born and raised in Concord, Massachusetts back in the 1950s, and we were eating the usual meals, lots of meat, dairy products, and eggs. And I remember as a little kid, when I got to be about 7 years old, I was thinking about these things a little bit more. I said to my mother, "So Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats?" And my mother said, "Yeah, well, the food we're eating is what everybody eats. It's normal food, that's what everybody eats." And I said, "Okay, thanks." And I came back a few minutes later, and my mother came back a few minutes later, and she said, "Well, actually, there are vegetarians." And I had never heard that word before, but I got the distinct impression, by the way she said it, that these people lived on another planet. And in fact, she said, "You'll never meet one." She said, "I've never met one. I'm a lot older than you are. I mean, I don't know where they get their protein." You know, so that was the end of it. My mother was totally right. I never heard the word again. I went on my way, you know, and eating the usual, like I say, usual meals. Going away to the summer camp in Vermont, this beautiful little dairy, you know, with chickens and pigs and cows, and but I learned when I was about 13 how to catch my chicken, put her down on the ground on this board, and have my axe, and, you know, cut her head off and put her through the skull tank, and, you know, eat the chickens. And, you know, at that point, I had gone through 13 years of the most intense indoctrination a human being can go through, 3 times a day, every single meal ritual of actually eating This is a very deep, powerful programming that we all get, indoctrination, and I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that these chickens were just put here by God for us to eat. They do not have a soul like we do. They taste good. If you don't eat them, you will definitely die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency, and so you just better eat them. That's it. Don't ask questions. That's what Jesus wants you to do. That's what we do here. And so I just couldn't question it at all. I didn't even begin to think about it, even though I was somewhat disturbed, of course, by doing it. And a few weeks later, we gathered around a dairy cow. And again, this is pristine, wonderful dairy, you know, but we just put a gun to her head and pulled the trigger. Because on any dairy, organic or not, after 4 years, maybe 5 years, their production begins to decline somewhat, and so it's not profitable really to keep feeding them, so they're all killed. And so I saw the terrible fear and suffering that she went through at our hands, and yet still the programming was so deeply entrenched in me, I couldn't really question it. And so I continued on. I went away to college in Maine back in the early 70s, and I heard that there were some vegetarians on campus, but I never met one, like my mother said. But then after college, I decided to go on this spiritual pilgrimage. I just decided, my brother and I, to just go to California, try to get to California. This is 1975, and so we got as far as Buffalo, and it was like freezing in October. So we headed south. We walked all the way, actually, from Buffalo, New York, all the way through upstate New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, into Kentucky, and into Tennessee. And when we got to Tennessee, we ended up living for a while at a place called The Farm. And in 1975, The Farm was the largest hippie commune in the world, and there they were. There was about 900 people living there, and they were all vegetarians. In fact, we would probably call them vegans because they didn't eat dairy or eggs either. And yet no one heard of the word vegan in 1975, so they just said, we're vegetarians. And I remember asking the fellow, so why are you doing this? Why are you vegetarians? And he said, well, there's two main reasons. One is, do you know what the animals go through? Actually, the first thing he said was, do you know why so many people are starving? And I said, no, why are so many people starving? He said, well, it's because most of the grain we're growing that could feed people, we're feeding to cows and pigs and chickens, and we're eating dairy products and eggs and meat, and people are starving. So we want to try to create a world of peace. And you can never have peace without justice, and you can never have, as long as you have hungry people, that's unjust, because we're growing plenty of food to feed everyone. And I thought, well, that's great, you know, that's really noble that you're eating lower on the food chain in order to help people eat. And he said, the other reason is, do you know what the animals go through? And I said, oh, I don't want to hear about it. And he said, well, you know, basically the animals that we're eating for food are raised in these stinking sheds where they never see the light of day, where very often they're mutilated in a variety of ways. They have their noses bashed and their ears noshed and their tails cut off, and they're castrated without anesthesia. Very often they're impregnated on these rape racks. Their babies are stolen. And then we take them out, and we hang them upside down, and we slit their throats. And as he was saying that, it was like suddenly, it was kind of like in The Wizard of Oz when Toto pulls the curtain back, you know, and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, you suddenly figure it all out. And I suddenly saw that this society that I had been raised in and was, you know, thought was a certain way, really is not that way. I mean, there's this massive ocean of violence hiding behind the curtain that we're not supposed to think about, we're not supposed to talk about. And I suddenly saw it, in a sense. I saw this terrible, terrible violence and abuse that we perpetrate as a society and really as individuals against these animals. And I've always loved animals, and I just saw this hell realm. So that was it. I mean, when he told me that, and the good thing, I guess, was I had this wonderful example of 900 people all thriving on a plant-based diet. They had probably 200 kids vegan from birth, right? And they were all thriving. We were eating together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, meals of vegetables and grains and things. So that was it. I never ate meat again in my life since that day in 1975 when this fellow said that, you know. I found out years later when I met Madeline in Switzerland, and we compared notes, and she said, yeah, she never ate meat again in her life either in the end of 1975 in Switzerland. But anyway, so that was the beginning, I think, for me anyway, of an enormously positive change, because I realized not only was it just as healthy, I didn't do it for health reasons, I just didn't want to take out my wallet and pay someone to torture animals and then eat that myself, of course, and I saw that it wasn't necessary. And then a few years later, I got out to California, and I learned about the cruelty to hens and to cows for dairy products and eggs. And so in 1980, I became a vegan. And a few years later, I decided to become a Zen monk in Korea. So I went to Korea, shaved my head, became a Zen monk. And I was living in this monastery, and I realized that I was in a monastery that had been practicing what we would call veganism for about 750 years, right? Since the 1200s, they were doing this. And no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, even mosquitoes, you wouldn't just kill them. You'd kind of try to take them outside, let them go, you know. There was this feeling of doing a lot. We were meditating from 3 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. You know, we're just doing a lot of sitting, a lot of introspection, a lot of, you know, working with the mind, quieting the mind, learning to become more receptive and to question, really, just to question the underlying delusion in our own minds and to be open. And so I realized that this idea of veganism is not this newfangled hippie idea from California. It's actually an ancient spiritual teaching that goes back thousands of years. It's an ethical teaching. It's really the foundational wisdom teaching on this planet that all of us as human beings, when our natural wisdom and compassion yearns to live in societies based on kindness and caring and respect for others, especially for those who are vulnerable in our hands. That there's something that just goes so against us to see someone gratuitously harming a being who's sensitive, and we don't like that. So we have to, I realized as a little kid I'd been raised in a society that forced me to shut down, to disconnect from my natural sensitivity and caring and awareness, and to just become hard and tough and compete and go along and do what I'm supposed to do. But I had this wonderful opportunity as a Zen monk in Korea to sort of just stop everything for many months in a silent retreat and be in this community where reflecting. And I realized, I think, what we all know on some deep level, that we're not essentially just a physical body, that we are fundamentally beings of consciousness, that we're essentially eternal, and that animals are also expressions. We're all expressions, and that essentially we're all interconnected, that life is interconnected, and that our welfare is interconnected. And the best way for us to be happy and to be free and to be loved is to be loving and to free others and to help others be happy. That this is the essential teaching we see in all the world religions. I used to teach comparative religion at the college level, and I've been fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time studying comparative religion. And basically, I think if you just distilled all the teachings of all the world religions down into one, and all the wisdom of all the great sages and saints and yogis, it would be basically whatever you most want for yourself, to give that to others, this basic thing. And so I realized that I was raised in a society that had essentially in many ways stripped that wisdom away and forced me to live in a way that wasn't really true to myself. So when I came back anyway, eventually to this culture, I felt like I had these roots of veganism that went much deeper than before. I realized that it's not just about the cruelty to animals and to the environment, the devastation, and my own health. It's really the cultural, anthropological, and spiritual dimensions and psychological dimensions of this are huge. And that once we begin to understand this at a deeper level as people, and understand our culture at a deeper level, then we'll be able to transform our society in a positive way, and that transformation essentially is founded upon questioning the massive cruelty and abuse and violence towards animals. That's the most important thing. That's really the key point. We live, I realize this, and it's kind of hard to even imagine, but we live in a society, just in the United States, this nation, where we kill every single day for food 75 million animals. So that's a number that is so huge, our mind just kind of can't comprehend. How do we kill 75 million animals every day? There's no big headline in the New York Times saying, wow, big disaster, 75 million animals were killed. This is business as usual. And the good news, in a sense, is that it's not some government program that we can't stop, it's just happening. This is something that's happening for only one reason. It's because we, the people, every day take out our wallets and vote for it. That's the thing. So we can understand that and realize that these votes get counted. I'm not sure about the other votes, but I know these do get counted, the votes with our wallets, with our money. And so as we begin to understand this at a deeper level, not only change our votes, but work to help raise awareness about all of this, to educate, to inform, to embody what veganism is, kindness and compassion, and to help the institutions in our society move away from subsidizing all of this and teaching this to our children and to each other, then we are creating a revolution. We become a revolution of one. I cannot change someone else, but I can understand myself and make an effort to understand myself and to live my values. And I think as we do that as individuals, then we create a field around us of consciousness that naturally helps other people to actually question as well. And we're seeing this. We're seeing a benevolent evolution, I would say, happening in our society, where in many ways I think it's a really powerful transformation that's happening, where we're beginning to live in a way where we're questioning and the violence towards animals on our plates, and going vegan is, I think, the foundation of a new world that's beckoning, that we have to be able to envision and work towards if we're going to have a world for our children. So this is the brief synopsis of how things kind of unfolded for me, and I think part of that is, for me, has been to look deeply into, like I said, both the outer and the inner ramifications of our food choices. There are a lot of books and articles and things that go into the outer ramifications of this. There are not many that go into the inner. This is probably one of the only books that really does that. And so I'll spend a few minutes on the outer, but then I want to spend some time going into how it affects us on the inner level. On the outer level, just briefly, this is something we could really talk for a long time, and I'm going to try to just keep it very brief. Environmentally, see, the thing is, animal agriculture, this is the main point, animal agriculture is the most devastating thing that we human beings are doing, the most devastating behavior, activity that we're engaging in terms of the outer world, our environment and our society and our physical health. Environmentally, it's just almost an insane way of acting, because it's so inefficient. I mean, it takes an enormous amount of grain and land and petroleum and water when we feed all that to animals and then eat the flesh and secretions of those animals rather than eating those foods directly. We're living in California right now. There's this terrible drought, which is at the point of causing people to really leave the state. I mean, people don't know what to do. When you look at most of the water is going actually to dairy and meat production, and yet no one in the media really talks about this. It's hidden. All of this is very much hidden. We have to get together like this at the Alawai, whatever it is, and talk about it, because otherwise, it's not in the mass media very often. Because my father actually I was born and raised in a newspaper family, and I know this in my core. If you own media, you do not print or publish news that your advertisers don't like. You just don't do that, because they'll boycott you, and so we have to realize that the media, we have to have alternative media. We have to understand. We have to make an effort to understand what's really happening here. So environmentally, Natalie and I lived for 17 years in an RV, traveling around North America, solar panels on the roof, just giving lectures, concerts, and workshops and things. And most of North America has been reduced to vast fields of monocropped corn and soy, genetically engineered alfalfa, to feed to animals who you don't see. They're stuck in these sheds, like I was saying. But most people, I think it's for people. It's not. It's for animals. And so it takes just enormous quantities of grain. Roughly 80% of the grain we're growing in the United States is being fed to animals, and these animals convert it to four things, essentially: saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and huge amounts of sewage, which is very toxic and pretty much unregulated, because these industries are very powerful and they don't want to be regulated. And so it's polluting groundwater, aquifers, as well as surface water. It's causing large dead zones in the oceans. The pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and chemical fertilizers go in, and they're devastating, really, to water, air pollution, soil erosion. Underlying all of that is an enormous, not only a use of water and sucking aquifers dry, but also we're cutting down rainforests right now at a rate, and this is just the latest statistics, only a couple of months old, about an acre per second in the Amazon. So the driving force behind cutting down the rainforest in the Amazon is growing soy, essentially, to feed factory farm pigs, cows, chickens, and fishes eat huge amounts of soy, or to graze cows. And so when you're cutting down these rainforests, you're not just cutting down some trees. We're destroying ecosystems that took millions of years. They're pristine, full of life. And so we're also causing the largest mass extinction of species in 65 million years. It's a mass extinction. It's being driven by one thing, by people taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs. That is what's causing the mass extinction of species, because we're destroying habitat, the rainforest, and the oceans. The oceans are being strip mined of fish because the demand for fish is so enormous, because we're not just catching fish to feed to people directly. Scientists discovered a long time ago that if you enrich the feed of cows and pigs and chickens with fish meal, it's profitable. They give more milk, they give more eggs, they fatten up more. And so fish meal is a huge problem, because we're just overfishing the oceans. It's gotten to the point now where the world fishing fleet, since the late 80s, every year the production has increased, and every year the pounds of fish they catch has decreased every year, because the fish are gone. So now 2/3 of the fish we're eating are factory farmed, and factory farm fishing, aquaculture, it's brutal. I mean, factory farming of land animals is really very, very painful and terrible for these animals. But I mean, I've seen these places where these poor fish are in these pools that the water's totally black, and they, and I thought there was nothing in these pools, and I realized they're just packed with these fish, and they're swimming in their own feces, and they're dumping in all kinds of chemicals and antibiotics to keep the fish alive, and people are eating that stuff and being told that it's healthy, or they're feeding those fish, of course, to pigs and cows and chickens. Cows in the United States actually eat more fish than human beings do, even though it's comical to think of a cow trying to catch a fish, but this is what they're doing. And yet, no one argues the fact that we're growing enough food every single year to feed at least 12 billion people, right? We're growing enough to feed virtually twice as many people as we have, and yet we have 1 billion people starving. So the reason is like I said, it's so inefficient. We're feeding most of the grain to animals and eating them. So that inefficiency translates into hunger and starvation. And when you have mothers who see their babies dying in their arms of hunger, and not far away are these other people who are eating so high off the hog, we're taking most of the grain and most of the land and most of the petroleum and causing most of the pollution, and we're eating meat, dairy, and eggs. That's going to essentially assure that our weapons manufacturers will always make good profits, right? There's always going to be conflicts, there's always going to be wars, there's always going to be these problems. And so the irony involved in all this also is that while the people in the less industrialized nations are suffering from diseases of just hunger, people in the more industrialized nations are suffering from diseases that come from excess consumption, right? Eating lots of fats and protein is very hard on our system. And so we have these epidemics of diseases like, well, you know what they are: liver disease and kidney disease and hypertension and autoimmune diseases of various kinds, breast, prostate, and colon cancer, and heart disease and strokes and Parkinson's and so forth. So these diseases are all linked, diabetes, obesity, these are all linked to, again, to diets that are high in these animal-based foods. And so that is something to understand. Also, the other thing, just basically, I think it's important to understand, is that animal agriculture essentially is traumatic. And it's obviously extremely traumatic for the animals whose bodies we're eating. They are totally terrified. They're going through both chronic and acute terror and pain their entire lives since they're born. We leave here and we go out and we see people going into McDonald's or somewhere, grocery store, and buying meat and dairy. We have to realize there's only one reason anyone ever does that. The one reason is people are following orders. That's it. There's no other reason than that. That's the reason. We're just doing what we've been told to do. No one can ever argue that point. No one's eating meat and dairy for any other reason than they're following orders that were injected into us against our will from the time we're little infants by every institution in our society, by our family, by the religion, by education, by the government, by the media, by the corporations, by the banks. Every institution in our society is in total agreement about this, and we get injected with this, and it's very powerful. So the fact that for me anyway, the fact that anyone goes vegan is almost a miracle, because you have to actually question basically our parents, teachers, ministers, government officials, corporations. We have to question all of that. It's not easy. And our friends and family. I mean, when you think about all this, you would think that if someone came along and went and decides to go vegan, and then they tell their friends and family, hey, guess what, everyone, I decided to go vegan. And the friends and family would say, wow, that is awesome. You're going vegan? man, that's so terrific. I mean, you're just like, you're using a lot less water, a lot less land. The wildlife can come back again. The health insurance is going to go down for everyone. Not going to be so many sick people. Wars will be less. People get hungry. People can be fed. I mean, you're living your life like you really care, and you're living your life to help others, to bless future generations. That is the greatest news. Thank you so much. I just love you. That's beautiful. Fantastic. Is that what they say when you tell them you're going vegan? I mean, why not? It's absolutely true, and yet this is the situation we find ourselves in. It's people say, "Oh, you're vegan. Oh, I guess I don't want to be your friend anymore." So we find ourselves, you know, in many ways, in a situation where it's kind of like what Krishnamurti said. Krishnamurti said something like, "It's not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society." You know, in many ways, we want to be well-adjusted to whatever society we're born into, and get along and have everybody like us. And food is the main way that we bond and relate to each other, right? So when someone goes vegan, it's like we're questioning the main bonding and the main thing we do when we get together and what we're eating. And yet, this is it. How do we respond? Once we know the devastating effects of animal agriculture to the environment, to hungry people, to the earth, to everybody, how do we respond to that? How do we actually live our lives? Do we live our lives according to our values, or do we just fit in and go along and follow orders, kind of like with blinders on, just doing what we've been told? And that's really the test, I think, that we're essentially on this planet right now facing. And if we don't, I think it's pretty obvious, if we don't, as a society, awaken out of this trance, we're going to be following each other head, nose to tail right off a cliff. I mean, because we're clearly devastating the ecosystems, and with, you know, the very first word, I don't have time to go into all this, but historically, when we started owning animals as property for food, I have a whole chapter that goes into this, and the history of this goes back to Iraq, actually, or that part of the Eastern Mediterranean area. People first started owning sheep, and then wild sheep, and then wild goats, and then later wild cows as property for food. We call it herding. It only goes back 10,000 years. It's a pretty recent thing. But when that happened, what rose concurrently with that was a wealthy class that was wealthy for one reason. They owned livestock. Livestock was wealth. We get the word capital, which the word capitalism comes from. Capita means head, as in head of sheep and goats. And so once certain people started owning a lot of capital, they got very powerful, and they controlled all the institutions in their society gradually over thousands of years. It was a very gradual revolution, but it was a revolution of reducing beings to things. These beings were no longer beings that were respected, pigs and cows and other animals. They were seen as merely as property, as wealth, as slaves. They were just things to be used. And so we reduced beings to things, and pretty soon also women were reduced to be, because as the men started seeing the animals as mere breeders, pretty soon they started seeing women as mere breeders, and pretty soon we had boys emulating the role model of a hard, tough, disconnected male capable of violence towards animals, towards other rival herders, and towards women. And this very patriarchal, violent, warlike society, it actually created two institutions that are still with us that were never on this planet before. One of them is war. There had never been war until people started owning animals. The very first word for war that we know of is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya. Literally means the desire for more cows. So when someone saw someone with a lot of cows, they'd say, let's go get those cows. They wouldn't give up without a fight, so you'd have this huge battles that started happening that had never happened before. But once you have livestock, you have war. Once you have war, you have slavery. Whoever lost the war, it's a small step to go from owning an animal as property to owning another human being as property. And so we had this very hideous new traditions, new horrible institutions of war and violence, of oppression, of commodifying people, of castrating men as slaves, of impregnating female slaves to get more slaves and so forth. And so these very violent bellicose societies spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Northern Mediterranean, to Central Asia, to Europe. They came over here to the Americas, and it's basically spreading throughout the entire world, and they have been spreading. We're born into that same society. It's a society based at its living core on dominating animals and eating them. And if we want to have peace and freedom and justice, we absolutely can. There's nothing stopping us except one thing. It's the practice of animal agriculture, which devastates the earth, devastates our society, and devastates our own physical health. But at a deeper level, it devastates our awareness, our consciousness. We have to shut down our natural intelligence and compassion And when we do that, then we don't have the capacity to solve the problem. So what we're really talking about is resurrecting our intelligence and compassion and living in a way that's in harmony with the earth and with animals and with each other. And all of it comes down to what's on our plates. It's, we can eat meat, right? We can do it. Cows are eating huge amounts of meat. I mean, does that mean they're supposed to be eating meat? Remember, cows are eating meat not because they want to, it's because it's in the interest of their exploiters that they're eating meat. And it's basically the same for us. It's not in our interest. We can do it. Our bodies will probably go, I hope you don't do that again, but all right, I'll do the best I can. Our bodies can really, they're fantastic how they can somehow deal with it. I ate meat for 21 years. But I think once we begin to realize that our physiology is designed for plant-based foods. How many of you have been, for example, to the Grand Canyon in Arizona? Have some of you been to the Grand Canyon? Yeah, quite a few. Anyway, it's if you haven't been there, it's this big canyon in Arizona. And we were there a couple of years ago. And I remember, living in our RV, we were on the South Rim, which is the main place people go, and you're looking down this gigantic, amazing view, and there's this trail called the Bright Angel Trail that goes all the way down to the Colorado River, which is at the bottom. And I remember as we walked around and saw these beautiful vistas, there's these signs everywhere that say, warning, warning, danger, never attempt to hike all the way down to the Colorado River and back up in one day. That is not a day trip. Don't do it. People die trying to do that. And they have examples of people who die trying to go down to the Colorado River and back. And so I said to Madeline, I want to give that a try, So the next morning I took off and I went down the Bright Angel Trail all the way down. Finally got to the Colorado River at the bottom. There was a sign down there that said, no swimming. So I took a quick swim. Then I turned around and came back up, and I was back up actually on the South Rim again before noon for lunch. And Madeline said, wow. And I said, well, those signs, they're just not made for vegans. They're made for, there's nothing to be proud of. They're just, they're made for regular people. Because, the basic idea is if we're eating the diet that we're designed to be eating, then we're going to be healthy. Right? I mean, our arteries aren't going to be all clogged up with saturated fat and cholesterol and acidifying animal protein and all this other stuff. We're not going to have all these hormones and, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and all this other stuff. It's toxic. So I think living a life that, as we're intended to, has enormous side benefits. This has been one of the great side benefits for me. I haven't been to a doctor in 40 years. It's just a great thing on that level. I never did it for health, but it's just fabulous. We don't even go to drugstores or anything. I go there to buy Band-Aids, but that's about it. So, and my mother, for example, I have to say this, my little sister, who when she was about, I guess, I don't know, she was maybe 2 and I was maybe 6. My mother said I had to feed her. She was in the high chair and I was trying to feed her. My mother said, make sure she eats her protein. So I was like, come on, eat your protein, and she kept spitting it out. So I'd make it like an airplane. Here comes the protein, it's really good, you gotta eat it, but be strong like me, And I'd put the meat in her mouth and she always spit it out. So I'm so glad, so I was pretty much forcing it down her throat, I didn't want her to die of a protein deficiency. My mother said, your sister died of a protein deficiency and it's your fault, So I'm glad to say that my sister eventually went vegan. And my sister's daughter is a vegan, and my sister's daughter's 2 kids are vegan from birth, and my mother's a vegan. She's like 86, and she's the only one in her retirement community in Florida who's not on drugs of some kind. And Madeline's mother is 95 years old, a vegan in Switzerland. And I think, so it's never too late to go vegan, even if you do it in your 70s or 80s. It's always, for both of our mothers, it's been a really great thing for them to do. And so from a health point of view, I think we see these enormous benefits, essentially. But I'm hoping I have time to talk a little bit about the inner side of this. Yeah, I have a few more minutes. So the inner side of this, essentially, is what does it do to our consciousness? And so this is something that I have, quite a few chapters in the World Peace Diet. The basic idea is whatever we sow, we reap. Have you heard that idea? I call it the boomerang effect. Whatever we put out comes back. One way of saying it is like Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. The idea is that what we do to others does come back in some way. And so we live in a society that harms animals on a massive scale, and we think everything's fine because they don't sue us, right? Or they don't rise up and attack us. So we think, well, we get away with it. We don't realize that our violence towards them always retaliates in some way or other. And so what we have to realize, I think, is that the meals that we're eating are rituals that teach us a certain way of being, a way of thinking, a certain quality of mind. And I would say it has maybe 5 primary characteristics. One of them that's very important is it's a every meal is a ritual of injecting into us a mentality of disconnectedness. And this is something that's very powerful. When we're sitting at the table, we're eating hamburger, or we're eating bacon, or eating whatever it is, scrambled eggs. We are learning at a very deep level not to make the connections between what's on our plate and what it took to get it on our plate. If we did, it would be disturbing. We just don't connect. And yet when you look deeply, I talk about it in here, systems theory and so forth, understand that intelligence, the intelligence of human beings, of any living system, is based on that system's capacity to make connections. When you can't make connections, the intelligence of this system is destroyed. Cultures are intelligent systems, right? And individuals, human beings. So we learn to block connections, to not make connections. And so this reduces our actual intelligence, I think not only sort of cognitive, but also ethical intelligence. And it would be very strange, for example, for someone to be eating bacon, you know, on Sunday morning or something, and to say to everybody at the table, well, this bacon's pretty good. I wonder what she was like. You wonder what who was like. What are you talking about? Well, the pig, you know, that I'm eating. I'm eating a pig here, right? What are you talking about? You know, shut up! Don't talk about it. You know, we're not. This is a big taboo to say that. This shows how. I mean, this should be the most obvious thing. You would think with food. Food is our most powerful connection with nature. It's the most powerful thing for our health, for our most powerful connection with our society. That we would be very aware of what we're eating. We would want to be aware. We would naturally really want to know. And yet we don't want to know. We just don't want to know. Of course, we don't want to know because there's so much horror and violence and abuse and misery, we don't want to know about it. So we stay shallow. So we learn, we practice. Every meal is learning to stay shallow, not look deeply, not think deeply, not listen deeply, not care deeply, not feel deeply, just to stay on the surface. That works very well for large corporations who want to have reliable consumers who will believe whatever the news tells them, who won't ask any questions, who will reliably buy whatever's advertised in the advertisements. What we're talking about with veganism is questioning the official stories, looking deeply, listening deeply, caring deeply, and making an effort to understand what's really going on, to make connections. And it's gloriously empowering to do that. So that's number one. So that's disconnecting. So it's also a mentality of privilege and elitism, essentially, because the subtext of every meal is that certain beings are inherently superior, other beings are inherently inferior, and it's totally fine for the superior beings to dominate and exploit the inferior beings. Every meal is basically, that's the subtext. We don't talk about it, but that's essentially that's the underlying assumption. And so we wonder why we have a society where essentially there's rampant inequality, where you have some, you know, I just read the other day, I'm sure you're all aware of this, the 85 richest people in the world have more wealth than 3.5 billion people, right? I mean, this kind of inequality, again, every meal though is saying this is it, this is how it is. Some people are entitled, they're more entitled, they're worth more. So privilege and elitism, disconnectedness, also reductionism. The essential message of every meal is that certain beings are not beings, they're just things. We harvest them like they're just broccoli or something like that. And so again, with veganism, we're making an effort not to reduce beings to things, to see beings as beings. So veganism isn't any great thing. It's not being any better than anyone or anything like that. It's just simply coming home to our own heart, coming home to our true nature and to our true way of seeing. And when we see beings rather than just seeing things. Once we do that, that's a huge revolution, a benevolent revolution, because then we begin to honor and respect others. And when we begin to honor and respect others and esteem them, then we finally will find our own self-respect and self-esteem and self-confidence returning to us. So the other one, the other main one, there's a few more, but another main one is in agriculture, essentially, maybe two more. One is it's exclusion. We learn every meal is to exclude other beings from the sphere of our compassion. What veganism is, obviously, is radical inclusion. It's saying I'm going to include all beings within the sphere of my kindness and compassion. I'm not going to exclude anyone. I'm going to include everybody. I care about everybody. I care about other human beings, hungry people, future generations, ecosystems, animals, wildlife. Care about and love every being, every expression of life. It's a wonderful foundation for living. As soon as I start excluding, I'm excluded. and it creates suffering and misery ultimately. So it's really about, again, questioning these underlying assumptions. The other one that's very important, though, I think too, maybe the most important of all, is it's a repression of what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as Sophia, the sacred feminine. You know, every meal essentially is repressing Sophia. Sophia, Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. And I think Sophia represents within us, within all of us, whether we're men or women, we have this inner wisdom. I think women have it a little more. The wisdom of mothers to love their babies, that love that will just, protect and care for life, and protect and care for the neighborhood and the family and the community. But we all have that. But being forced as little kids to eat the flesh and secretions of just horribly abused animals, that represses Sophia. That just shuts it down. And again, when you have people whose Sophia has been repressed, then you have what we have. You have people that don't really care about, well, we can see what's happening. We're cutting down the rainforest at an acre per second, and we just let it happen. We're destroying the oceans, we let it happen. We have corporations invading our lives with advertising, targeting our children with pornography and violence to sell them products, to turn them into consumers, to buy things that are toxic for them, and we just let it happen. Sophia would never let that happen. Sophia would rise up and say, no, I want to protect our life here on this earth. And so what veganism is a resurrection of Sophia. It's a resurrection of the sacred feminine within us in a meaningful way, not just an abstract way, but it's like, I'm not going to pay for that. I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to give that to my children. I'm not going to live in that way. I'm going to live in a way that's in alignment with my values. And there's no greater gift, I think, that we can give to the world than to make an effort to understand these connections and understand the impact of all of this. And really understand also, I think, that animal agriculture from the very beginning was not merely about human beings abusing and exploiting animals. What it's really about from the very beginning is male human beings, men, abusing and exploiting female animals. It's always been about that, and it's still about that. You could not have animal agriculture without the massive sexual abuse of animals. I mean, it's raping them on rape act, it's stealing their babies, and this kind of violence towards mothers and babies is the background of our society. And so if we're going to have a healthy society with healthy relationships between men and women, and between ourselves and nature and animals, and just within our own hearts with ourselves and with our spiritual sense of being at home in a benevolent universe, we have to question the violence on our food plates. And that's why I think this is such an enormously positive message. So even though you're sitting there probably going, well, this doesn't sound like that positive of a message so far. I'm just telling you a little bit of the disasters of animal agriculture. But the underlying message is enormously positive, because when we move toward a plant-based diet, think about it. We know how to grow food now. We can feed everyone on a fraction of the land without destroying the oceans and the rivers and the rainforests and the new technologies of growing food. We can grow huge amounts of food on small acres and feed everyone. And so when we understand that we can be healthy, we can feed people, we can thrive, there's nothing stopping us from creating a whole different way of living except eating cheeseburgers and hot dogs and milkshakes and so forth. But once we begin to see that, and we begin to also see that vegan food is delicious, right? Have you noticed that so far? I mean, it doesn't even really take acquiring a taste anymore. I mean, it used to be you have to kind of acquire a taste for tofu or something. But I mean, with these new products, you can't even tell the difference. I mean, so I think we're seeing, I think we're right at the beginning in many ways of an enormously positive new boost in the momentum of the vegan change happening. That I really see 2015 as a time where we're getting in touch with huge changes that are happening. The secondhand, you remember the secondhand smoking thing? I gotta see my time. I'm gonna have to begin to wrap it up. Okay, remember secondhand smoking? I mean, smoking for when I was a kid, doctors recommended smoking, right? It was like everybody did it. And then at one point, then it was kind of, well, it's not really a good idea, but it's your personal choice. If you want to smoke, it's a personal choice. But then when they figured out about secondhand smoke, that if you're smoking, you're hurting other people, and then third-hand smoke, if you just go into a room where someone has smoked, that's hurting you. Then it was like we started passing all these laws, the tobacco lobby, and now they're just working, they've pretty much given up here, and they're trying to peddle their wares in China and South America and everywhere else. So there's been a real victory in many ways over this whole thing with tobacco, and it's because of the secondhand smoke. We're seeing the same thing now. Really, it's coming in huge with secondhand eating. You know, that eating meat, for example, and dairy is not just a personal choice. You know, anyone who does that is hurting everyone. You know, you're hurting animals, you're hurting our water supply, you're hurting global climate change. You know, you're making the world unlivable for everyone. And so for the first time, the USDA is actually changing their food recommendations now. The governmental panel, you probably all read about that, has recommended eating less meat and dairy because they are the most devastating things environmentally. The animal agriculture lobbies are screaming, oh, you can't do that, you know. But the handwriting's on the wall. You know, it's more and more, it's going to become obvious that you cannot eat meat and dairy. It's becoming more and more, it will be more and more seen as unacceptable because we just don't have enough land and resources to do that, and the cruelty is becoming more obvious as well, and the fact that it's so terrible for our health, we all have to pay for that also. So the final thing I'll just say here in wrapping up is that I think it's important to realize that there are stages in the journey of veganism, because a lot of times we think that, you know, if we can just learn enough, then we go vegan, and if we can get someone else to go vegan, that's great, you know. And I think it is, but what I've realized is that there are definite stages on the path, and when someone just goes vegan, there's this tendency to think, okay, I'm vegan now I'm done, right? That's it, I'm perfect, don't talk to me anymore, everything's perfect, you know, I'm a vegan. And I think we have to really be very careful of that attitude, because it's really, when we go, first of all, there's many different reasons for going vegan, but even when we do that, very often in the beginning stage, we're just a beginner, right? And beginners make lots of mistakes. We don't know really what we're doing half the time. We're eating foods that aren't very healthy. A lot of vegans are just not healthy. They're kind of sickly or whatever, they're not eating properly. And so it's important to make an effort to understand how to be healthy doing this, and also to understand how to interact. There's a lot of social complexities to this whole thing. What do you say to people when they say, well, so you're a vegan, so what? You know, carrots are screaming too, you know, and so what do you say when they say that? Or Jesus, you know, you must hate Jesus because Jesus ate fish, you know, or whatever. People say all kinds of things to you, you know. So when we're a beginner, we go, oh no, what do I say? Oh, maybe they're right. Maybe I better eat a little bit of meat, you know, because, you know, carrots are screaming too. So unfortunately, really, it's true. A lot of people go vegan, I think, well, some anyway, and if you talk to them a few years later, they're not vegan anymore, because the pressure to revert back is very powerful in our society. We all want to fit in. So it's important for us to persevere beyond the beginning stages. That's why it's very important for us to make an effort to learn more. That's why in the World Peace Diet, I have the huge picture of the history and psychology, anthropology, and the spiritual and everything else, so that we can understand the deep structure. So if we persevere beyond the beginning stage, we reach the second stage. The second stage is also not that great. That's the angry vegan stage. So that's part of the problem. Going vegan it's a wonderful thing, but the first two stages are not that great. So the angry vegan stage is, now I understand, I know how to eat food, I'm healthy, I'm feeling great, and I know how to answer people's questions, I'm getting some confidence here, I've done my research, but now I'm just angry all the time. Because I tell people, and they just say, well, I'm going to eat my burger anyway. The average person can walk down a typical street and they're just happy. There's Burger King, yum yum yum. There's Kentucky Fried Chicken. There's McDonald's. Red Lobster. It's just what a great place to live. The average vegan walks down the same street and it's just, oh no, there's Murder King and there's Dead Lobster. Oh, there's junk in the box, and it's just hell everywhere. It's terrible. And somebody says, oh, so you're a vegan? Oh, I'm a vegan. It's just so horrible. People are, don't know what they're doing. Animals are being tortured. I can't stand it any longer. Well, I guess I sure don't want to be a vegan then. That doesn't sound like anything I want to do. So it's very important for us to realize that there is another stage beyond the angry vegan stage. And some people try to avoid the angry vegan stage by what I refer to as the closet vegan stage, where they say, so you're a vegan? No, not really. Just please leave me alone. I don't want to talk about this. So it's important to avoid get beyond those, to what I refer to as deep veganism, where we understand the deeper structure of our society, we understand the situation with animals, we understand how we can for sure thrive on a vegan diet, how there is suffering to animals happening, but it's not because of us, and we're doing what we can to make a better world, and we begin to really love our life and be filled with joy and happiness, and be aware that we are part of a positive transformation, that we can get up every morning and give thanks for this precious opportunity of a human birth, where we can somehow contribute to the awakening of humanity, that we came here to this planet. We're only here for a few years. We're not here very long. A few years, right? I'm in my 60s now. I'm telling you, it goes by so fast. So we're just here for a few years. While we're here for this brief time, do something worthwhile. There's nothing more worthwhile anyone can do than to make an effort to understand the situation here and then to embody what veganism is, which is love. Another word for veganism is kindness. Another word is caring. Another word is freedom. Another word is creativity. Another word is compassion, kindness, and love. Veganism is love. And so we're embodying love. That means questioning the official stories. A lot of them are in our own heads, questioning all of that, and living our lives to be an example of caring and kindness, and we will naturally begin to transform in the time we're here to do the best we can to help this planet, which is sending out an SOS, help, help, help. So we came here to help, and if we can do something to help, then that's a reason to feel that we are living a life that's worth living, and to go forth and to do the best we can to multiply this message. I'll say go forth and multiply. Multiply the message, to embody the message. I think that's the most important thing, because we can't change someone, but by embodying the message, we create a field around us. There's a great line in one of Walt Whitman's poems. He says, "I and mine, we do not convince by our arguments. We convince by our presence." This basic idea, just by embodying this at a deep level, people get the feeling of what this is. And instead of hating people, to love people. That's really how this whole thing is. People are wounded. We're all wounded. We're all in the same boat. So instead of thinking, I'm on this side, I'm right, you're not a vegan, you're wrong, we're all on the same side. If there's anything that we have to deal with, it's the cultural program. So I want to thank you all so much for coming. I love you all. Thank you for making the efforts you're making, and keep up the great work you're doing. And it's really great to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Much love to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Will Tuttle, for your spellbinding and very persuasive presentation as to why and how we should live our lives with love and compassion for our fellow beings. Thank you very much. We'd now like to invite all of you to enjoy some tasty vegan dishes, courtesy of Down to Earth over here to my right. Mahalo to all of you for coming, and have a safe return home. Good night, everyone.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344, or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.